From the Gert Boyle studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Friday, April 4th. The Pacific Northwest is known for its rivers, the Columbia, the Willamette, the Klamath. These rivers provide drinking water, recreation, and economic opportunities. They water our crops and support diverse ecosystems. In recent years, there's been a shift toward returning more of these rivers to their natural state and removing dams. But the politics of dam removal are tricky. We are going to break it down for you. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
I'm Oregon Field Guide producer Cassandra Profita.
I'm OPB reporter Tony Schick.
Cassandra, let's start with you. You have spent a lot of time in the Klamath Basin over the years. Tell us about the Klamath River. Where does it start? Where does it end? What's your experience been like there?
So the Klamath River starts in southern Oregon. It kind of bubbles out these like underground springs. It's actually really beautiful at the headwaters, and it's just south of Crater Lake. It's north of Klamath Falls, and from there it snakes its way over the Cascades in northern California, and it empties into the Pacific just south of Crescent City. And the main stem is 263 miles long, so it's a really long river, and the basin is huge. It's 12,000 square miles.
Wow. Okay. So we have been hearing about the Klamath dams for a long time, decades. But can you give us just kind of a quick primer on the dams? How many are there and what's their purpose?
So there are 6 key dams that have made the biggest impacts on the Klamath River. The 4 that were recently removed were all built for hydropower. The first one was Copco 1 Dam, and that started in 1912, and it looks a little bit like Hoover Dam. It's kind of a miniature version. Eventually, there was also a Copco 2 Dam. So you had Copco 1, Copco 2, J.C. Boyle Dam, which is actually in southern Oregon, and Iron Gate Dam, which is the farthest downstream. Was the farthest downstream. Those dams were built to generate electricity for the communities in the area, which were relatively small communities. And so they didn't generate a ton of hydropower, and that meant that it wasn't actually that hard for Pacific Corp to replace the power that they were making. But they did provide jobs and tax revenue to some of these rural areas where that was really valued. And the communities didn't want to lose those. The reservoirs above Iron Gate Dam and Copco dams, those were really popular recreational lakes where people had homes, they had docks, they had boats, and they didn't want to lose those. That was a pretty huge change for them. And so that all made dam removal controversial on the Klamath. Along with some fears that, taking out these dams was going to release a flood of sediment and toxins down the river that would actually be bad for everybody. Now, I want to mention that there are also 2 dams that are still in place. Those are farther up in the southern Oregon, just below Upper Klamath Lake, Link River Dam and Keno Dam. They're both used to manage water for irrigation.
So you spent time on this river while the dams were in place and then went back after the dams were removed. What was that experience like? What surprised you after the dams were removed?
Well, so there were these huge reservoirs I mentioned above Iron Gate and Copco dams. And so it was really dramatic to see a river where, there used to be a huge lake. And so there were there was this moonscape of mud surrounding the river initially. And that did start to fill in with plants because they did this huge planting effort. So yeah, picturing where the dams used to be and how we manipulated the environment in those cases, you could actually do that standing below the dams and be like, wow, okay, I get it. I get it how the water fell down through these turbines and made power. In October, this was last year, we went out and we were filming essentially our after shots. We had done before shots of the dams, and then we went back to those same spots to get the after shots. And the salmon, we learned, were literally swimming right past us. So we got to see some of the first salmon to swim up above the Iron Gate Dam site. And we got to see their spawning behavior. And then that day, we also heard that, the salmon made it to Oregon. So we were just in exactly the right place at the right time. And we got to go up and see the first salmon to return to Oregon in 100 years, which was super exciting, super heartwarming, right? Everyone's feeling very hopeful. And that's why I have to mention that the thing that surprised me the most is actually something that's not very hopeful. I didn't know that the dams, the remaining dams, Link River Dam and Keno Dam, they were not built for adult salmon passage. And so those salmon that were swimming up into Oregon, as far as we know, the salmon this past year couldn't make it past them. And I was told all along through my reporting that they have fish ladders. It's going to be okay. But those fish ladders were not designed for adult salmon. And as far as we know, the salmon returning this past year couldn't make it over them.
So is there a plan to do something else now to get those
There are some plans. And so, they can be adjusted so that the salmon can swim past them. But my biggest surprise was that, oh, surprise, there's fish ladders, but they're not built for salmon, so the salmon have to stop there.
Some of the most direct impact of building these dams has been on indigenous people, and they've been fighting for decades to remove the dams. What do they tell you about this current movement?
Yeah. The indigenous people were really the ones who made dam removal happen on the Klamath. They followed the owners of the 4 hydroelectric dams really around the world. They staged protests in Scotland when Scottish Power was the owner of the dams, and then when Pacific Corp bought the dams, they were owned by Berkshire Hathaway. They were following Warren Buffett to his shareholder meetings and calling for Warren Buffett himself to take down these dams. And eventually they got it. The dams were one of many impediments to these tribes continuing their cultural traditions of catching salmon on the Klamath River. Without the removal of these dams, the tribes argued that the salmon really wouldn't have a chance of recovering. And after the dams were built, over the years, the salmon runs on the Klamath declined by more than 90%. And then, of course, up in Oregon, they were cut off completely because those hydropower dams below didn't have fish passage, which is eventually why they were removed. So the downstream tribes, the Yurok, the Karuk, the Hupa, they're all celebrating a brighter future for these dwindling salmon runs that they are still able to catch in most years. But other tribes like the Shasta and the Klamath tribes, they're celebrating the return of salmon to their homelands for the first time in over 100 years.
What did you hear from other people? Obviously, not everybody wanted these dams removed. What are some of the other voices you heard?
Yeah. I mean, there are some people who are mourning the loss of these dams and the jobs and the revenue and recreational lakes that came along with them. There are people who live in a community called Copco Lake where the lake is gone now, and they have to think about whether they want to rename their community. And, they had boats and they had docks and they had a whole, they had lifestyles that were built around the lakes. And so, there are people who are really, they're going to have to redesign their lives because of this. But I will say that there are a lot of people who are feeling really hopeful now. The Klamath Basin as a whole has gone through a lot of struggles over water shortages. And these water fights have pitted people against each other. And with the dams out, it actually feels like more people can connect with each other and find common ground because they're all hoping for salmon recovery. If they can all get on the same page of improving the salmon runs, actually the water shortage problem will be easier to manage.
Tony, let's turn to you. You have spent the last year focusing on the Willamette River, a very different river than the Klamath. Can you share a little bit about why you have focused on this river so much?
Yeah, it was an outgrowth of looking at salmon on the Columbia River system. And the Willamette is kind of, in terms of salmon populations, a little bit forgotten in terms of the Columbia Basin. It is, it's right in my backyard, so to speak, living in Portland, and it's a pretty dire situation in terms of the salmon populations have just been absolutely devastated on the Willamette. But it's also a situation with a lot of potential because in the upper parts of the watershed on some of these tributaries of the Willamette, there is really, really good habitat, but it's blocked right now by dams that were built without much regard for fish passage. And there is potential, though, because just like Cassandra was saying with the Klamath, where hydroelectric power was not a huge factor anymore, the dams on the Willamette produce hydroelectric power. Many of them do, but it's not as much as it used to be, and it's not very economical. In fact, the Public Power Council, which represents utilities that buy power from these dams, they kind of want hydropower to be shut down on these dams because it's so expensive. And so that kind of thing opens up potential for operating the dams in ways that might be better for salmon. So I was really intrigued by the Willamette being a really desperate situation for salmon, but also the potential that something new could be unlocked there.
So how has the political conversation around removing these dams played out?
So because of the purpose of the Willamette dams, they were built primarily for flood control in the Willamette Basin. There are old photos you can see of downtown Portland with streets underwater. Because they provide flood control, outright removal of those dams has kind of been a political non-starter. But what has been talked about is operating them in a very unique way, in that instead of holding these huge reservoirs behind the dams, they're talking about essentially draining those reservoirs and opening up all the outlets and gates in the dams that normally might only be used for maintenance or something. Opening all those up, letting the water flow through so that salmon can flow through, the water level's lower, it has more of a current, and you create almost like something like a naturally flowing river, but you still have that capacity to shut the gates. If you see a flood coming, you've still got all that area to store water in it. And they have experimented with that because of some court rulings that have said that the Army Corps of Engineers has to operate the dams in these ways at certain times. So they've experimented with draining the reservoirs at a couple of these dams. And it looks exactly as Cassandra was describing with the dam removal, is you've got this, it's like all of a sudden this giant reservoir is like a little channel and it's just a mudscape around it. And it's really striking because it looks like, it's being done for an ecological reason, but a lot of people are unnerved by it because it looks like it kind of looks ecologically wrong at first glance because of how much damage was done previously. It doesn't look the way it's supposed to, when you see that giant mudscape, but eventually it will start to.
And some of them are more visible than others. Like I was driving on Highway 58 and I saw the drained reservoir there and I was like, wait a second, what's going on? So if people can see it, they're going to ask questions.
They're going to wonder what's up with it. Yeah.
Do you feel like people have changed their opinion overall regarding dam removal? Because it feels like this has been a fight for so long, and just now we're starting to see, it seems like, a lot of action on this front. A lot of dams are coming out, and discussions are happening about what else could be done. Is the tide turning now for good?
I don't know if the tide ever turns for good. I think it just turns and then turns again and then turns again. But it certainly seems now like we are riding a wave of more willingness to debate that. And I mean, we're seeing some dams come out. We're seeing debate over dams on the Lower Snake River, which has been a debate. The Lower Snake River through Washington, the largest tributary of the Columbia. The 4 dams on the Lower Snake, that's been a debate basically since they went in the 60s and 70s. And I think we're seeing more steps toward potentially removing those dams than we ever have. You know, the Biden White House was exploring that through studies, and
I think there's been some interesting social experiments that have taken place with the dam removals that we have seen, right? And so we've seen, like, what does it look like if you have all the science saying, like, everything's going to be fine, but you have people who are very unhappy about it. And they're raising these fears of, like, what's going to happen, this flood of sediment, and, like, we don't want it. It's going to be devastating. And then it happens. And in most cases, it hasn't been as devastating as people who feared would be. And so seeing more of those successful dam removals, even when there's controversy, like I was going to mention on the Klamath, do you guys remember, like, there were deer that got stuck in the mud flats, and it was like, everybody who had fought against dam removal was like, look, like, this is a problem. Like, this is what we're talking about. Like, this is bad. And, like, there were bad things. There were some hatchery fish that were released into higher flowing water, and they all died during the removal process. And so there were bad things that happened, but then people actually survived those. And overall, fish and wildlife survived those. And we saw on the backside of it the improvements in the overall river system. And so we now have a lot more lived experience to see that the benefits of dam removal can outweigh that short-term pain.
I do think it's worth mentioning and just taking a moment here to sort of drill down into why we had the dams and hydroelectric power, really what that is, what we use it for, and why, people fought for keeping these dams in place.
Yeah, well, because we mentioned the dams that we've mentioned are not major producers of hydroelectricity, but many of the dams in the region are on the Columbia and the Snake River. Something like 60% of the energy in the region is...
Especially in Washington.
I think it's close to 70% from dams like Grand Coulee and Chief Joseph, just major producers of electricity. And so those are, big sources of carbon-free power at a time when Oregon and Washington need more power and want more carbon-free power.
Yeah, that discussion, I think, is still alive and well about which dams are worth taking out, given that we do get a lot of clean power from the existing dams. And we also know a lot about how much damage the dams are doing to the ecology of the river.
And some of the debate over dam removal is not just about the dams that are being removed. There's concern from people who rely on dams for hydroelectricity. There is concern I've seen in my reporting records of these discussions and debates. There's concern of, well, would there be a domino effect or a slippery slope of, well, once these dams are removed, a certain set of dams are removed, are the people advocating for those dams to be removed, are they just going to stop, or are they going to advocate for more dams to be removed? And that was something that came to mind when you mentioned the salmon not being able to get past the remaining dams on the Klamath, because a lot of these systems, you remove one dam and the salmon will bump into the next one.
Yeah.
And so that is definitely part of the kind of in the background of the debates over all of these is like, well, how far do you go?
Well, what is your sense on that? Do you feel like, some people would like to just see all the dams removed, or is there space for some to still exist?
I'm sure there are certain people who would like to see all of them gone. I don't think that's where any of the real debate is headed.
There's people who want things, and I've been talking to the Klamath tribes about this, about these 2 remaining dams on the Klamath. Of course, the tribes want those dams gone, but they recognize there's a reality in the Upper Klamath Basin. Link River Dam is essential to the farming operations that are happening. Without Link River Dam, this whole irrigation system that was built by the Bureau of Reclamation, it falls apart. And so the tribes recognize that even though they want want that dam gone, they understand it probably will not be removed because there is this huge farming economy that depends on it.
Historically, dams have sort of become the symbol of an era where humans did sort of whatever they needed to do to serve their own needs. And I think you guys have done a really nice job of laying out the landscape of where we're at with dam removals and the debates over the current dams. Are dams still going to be built in the future? I mean, what's the next 10 years look like for this?
It's a very difficult question, but I mean, I don't know of a lot of new dam projects that people are proposing. There may be some like smaller hydropower-like projects that will work better. Like I think about the ones where they put the little hydropower units in the pipes, right? And we make a lot of hydropower in the existing water pipes within the city. Like those types of, like I think we'll still use hydroelectricity. But not in the way that we have done it, where we, dam up a whole big river and destroy the surrounding landscape.
Yeah, like the Yakima Nation, their utility, Yakima Power, has a proposal to put some hydropower turbines in a irrigation canal. So that's a canal that's not really there for ecological purposes. You wouldn't really be having to dam up a wild river. So I think we could see things like that. I suppose anything's possible. The current administration has talked about unleashing American energy dominance. And so I don't know. But I do think it's hard to imagine something like Grand Coulee Dam getting built today.
Right. Yeah.
This has been really interesting. Thank you both for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
This week's episode was produced by Sage Van Wing. Our audio engineer is Nalene Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. In these uncertain times, we're certain you have questions about local politics. Maybe we can answer them. We would love to hear from you. Email us at opbpoliticsnow@opb.org. We will be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.